The stagecoach lurched violently over another rut in the dirt road, and Eleanor Harper gripped her leather portfolio tighter against her chest, protecting the precious sketches and paintings inside from the dust, filtering through every crack and seam of the cramped compartment. It was late June in 1876, and the Iowa heat bore down mercilessly on everything beneath the endless blue sky as the coach rattled westward toward Council Bluffs. She had left Philadelphia 3 weeks ago with nothing but her art supplies, a small trunk of clothing, and a burning determination to capture the untamed beauty of the West that she had only seen in photographs and read about in newspapers. At 23 years old, Eleanor had spent her entire life confined to parlors and studios, painting society portraits and still lifes that paid her bills but never stirred her soul. When her father passed away 6 months prior, leaving her a modest inheritance, she made the decision that scandalized her mother and sisters. She would go west, alone, and paint what truly moved her. The other passengers in the stagecoach consisted of a traveling salesman who had fallen asleep despite the violent jostling, a middle-aged woman with pinched lips who had disapproved of Eleanor from the moment she climbed aboard in the last town, and a young married couple who whispered nervously to each other and clutched their belongings with white-knuckled hands. Eleanor understood their fear. She had heard the stories of bandits and hostile encounters, of coaches held up at gunpoint and passengers robbed of everything they carried. But somehow the fear felt distant, less real than the overwhelming excitement that hummed through her veins every time she glimpsed something new through the window. The landscape had changed dramatically since she left the east. Gone were the dense forests and rolling green hills. Out here, the land stretched flat and golden under fields of prairie grass that rippled like an ocean in the constant wind. Occasionally they passed homesteads, small wooden structures that looked fragile and temporary against the vastness of the land. Eleanor had already filled 2 sketchbooks with quick drawings of everything she saw, her pencil flying across the pages during brief stops to change horses. "Council Bluffs, 20 minutes," the driver called down, his voice rough and weathered. Eleanor's heart leaped. She pressed her face closer to the window, eager for her first glimpse of the town that would be her home for at least the next few months. She had arranged lodging through correspondence with a widow named Mrs. Patterson who rented rooms to respectable single women. The arrangement had been difficult to negotiate by letter, as Mrs. Patterson had been suspicious of a young, unmarried woman traveling alone. But Eleanor's references and advance payment had eventually secured her a room. The town emerged gradually from the prairie, first as a dark smudge on the horizon, then slowly resolving into distinct buildings and structures. Council Bluffs sat on the eastern bank of the Missouri River, positioned as a crucial stopping point for those heading further west. The town had grown considerably in recent years, swelling with prospectors, settlers, and adventurers all chasing their various dreams across the frontier. Main Street bustled with activity, even in the afternoon heat. False-fronted buildings lined both sides of the wide dirt road, their painted signs advertising everything from dry goods to whiskey to legal services. Men on horseback moved through the street alongside wagons and pedestrians, creating a chaotic dance that somehow seemed to work. The stagecoach pulled to a stop in front of the Wells Fargo office, and the driver began unloading luggage from the boot. Eleanor stepped down carefully, her legs unsteady after so many hours of sitting. The heat hit her immediately, more intense and dry than the humid summers she knew from Philadelphia. She took a deep breath, tasting dust and horse and something indefinably different, something wild and untamed that made her fingers itch for her paintbrush. "Miss Harper." A plump woman with iron-gray hair approached her, wiping her hands on her apron. "I am Mrs. Patterson. I recognized you from your description in your letter." "Yes, thank you so much for meeting me," Eleanor said, relief flooding through her. She had worried about finding her way in an unfamiliar town. "Your trunk will be delivered shortly. My house is just 3 blocks from here, an easy walk." Mrs. Patterson's sharp eyes assessed Eleanor with the practiced gaze of someone who had seen all types pass through her establishment. "You look exhausted, dear. I have a room ready and supper will be at 6 o'clock sharp. I run a respectable house, and I expect my lodgers to maintain appropriate standards of behavior." "Of course," Eleanor agreed quickly. She had expected as much. Respectable widows who rented rooms to single women always had extensive rules about conduct, visitors, and propriety. The walk to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house gave Eleanor her first real view of Council Bluffs. The town seemed to exist in a state of constant motion and noise. Hammers rang out from new construction sites, horses whinnied and stamped in the street, and voices called out in greeting or business or argument. Women in bonnets carried baskets and parcels, while men in work clothes or business suits moved between buildings. Eleanor noticed several saloons already doing brisk business despite the early hour, their doors swinging open to release bursts of piano music and raucous laughter. Mrs. Patterson's house stood on a quieter residential street lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. The 2-story wooden structure had been painted white recently, with green shutters at each window and a wide porch across the front. It looked neat and well-maintained, and Eleanor felt her remaining anxieties ease somewhat. Her room on the 2nd floor was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, and most importantly, excellent light from 2 windows that faced south and west. Eleanor immediately began planning how she could set up her easel to take advantage of the natural illumination. Her trunk arrived within the hour, delivered by a young man who refused to meet her eyes and fled as soon as she tipped him a nickel. That evening at supper, Eleanor met the other residents. Miss Judith Winters taught at the local school and had opinions about everything, which she shared whether asked or not. Mrs. Caroline Webb was a young widow whose husband had died in a farming accident 2 years prior, leaving her to support herself by working as a seamstress. And Mr. Thomas Green was an elderly gentleman who worked as a clerk at the land office and spoke very little, though his eyes were kind behind his spectacles. "An artist," Miss Winters said when Eleanor explained her purpose in Council Bluffs. The schoolteacher's tone suggested she found the profession somewhere between amusing and suspicious. "How unusual, and what exactly do you intend to paint out here?" "Everything," Eleanor replied honestly. "The landscape, the people, the animals. I want to capture the reality of the West, not the romanticized versions people back east imagine." "Well, you will find plenty of reality here," Mrs. Webb said softly. She had a gentle voice and sad eyes that Eleanor instinctively wanted to sketch. Perhaps too much reality at times. "There is a certain wildness to this place," Mr. Green added, one of his rare contributions to the conversation. "It attracts wild people for good or ill." Mrs. Patterson served beef stew with fresh bread, both hearty and well prepared. The conversation moved to local gossip and news, giving Eleanor a sense of the town's rhythms and concerns. There had been a dispute over water rights between 2 ranchers to the north. The railroad was planning an expansion that would bring more commerce, but also more unsavory elements. The marshal had arrested 3 men for disturbing the peace outside the Silver Dollar Saloon. Normal small-town affairs, Eleanor supposed, though tinged with the particular flavor of frontier life. That night, exhausted from travel, Eleanor fell asleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. She dreamed of vast open spaces and colors she had never seen before, vibrant and alive and calling to her. The next morning dawned clear and already warm. Eleanor dressed in her simplest work dress, pinned her dark blonde hair into a practical knot, and gathered her sketch supplies into her leather satchel. At breakfast, she asked Mrs. Patterson about suitable places nearby where she might paint. "The riverbank can be pleasant, though you must be careful of the mud and the rough men who work the docks," her landlady advised. "There is a small park near the center of town with benches and shade. Some of the local ladies take their constitutional there in the afternoons." "I was hoping for something more authentic," Eleanor said carefully. "Perhaps the ranches or farms outside town." Mrs. Patterson's expression grew stern. "Miss Harper, I must advise caution. You cannot simply wander about the countryside alone. It is not safe, and it is certainly not proper." "What would people think?" Eleanor had expected this resistance. "Perhaps I could hire someone to accompany me, a guide who knows the area. Even that would be questionable for an unmarried woman," Miss Winters interjected. She had apparently been listening closely from her seat across the table. "You must consider your reputation, Miss Harper. Out here, a woman's good name is often all she has." Frustration bubbled in Eleanor's chest, but she forced it down. She had not traveled all this way to paint park benches and residential streets. There had to be a solution. She just needed to find it. After breakfast, Eleanor decided to explore the town more thoroughly. She walked down Main Street with her sketchbook tucked under her arm, observing everything with an artist's eye. The morning light cast long shadows across the storefronts, and the dust in the air gave everything a slightly golden haze. She paused occasionally to make quick sketches. The way a group of horses stood hip-shot at the hitching rail, the profile of an old prospector sleeping on a bench, the gesture of a woman reaching up to adjust her bonnet. She was standing across from the general store, sketching the interesting arrangement of goods displayed in the window, when a commotion erupted down the street. Eleanor looked up to see a horse galloping toward her, its rider leaning low over its neck. They moved with such perfect synchronization that for a moment they seemed like a single creature, powerful and wild. The rider pulled the horse to a sliding stop directly in front of the general store, and Eleanor found herself staring. The man swung down from his saddle with easy grace. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and lean hips. His dark hair needed cutting, curling slightly over his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He wore dusty work clothes, canvas pants, and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. A worn leather hat hung down his back from a cord around his neck, and a bandana was tied loosely around his throat. But it was his face that caught Eleanor's attention. Strong features, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though at the moment it was set in a line of concentration. And his eyes, even from across the street, she could see they were a striking pale blue-gray, like storm clouds over the ocean. He was, quite simply, one of the most beautiful human beings Eleanor had ever seen, and she had spent years studying human form and face in art classes and museums. Without thinking, her hand moved across her sketchbook, rapidly capturing the line of his shoulders, the angle of his jaw, the way he stood with unconscious confidence as he looped his horse's reins over the hitching post. "That is Xavier Ellsworth," a voice said beside her. Eleanor jumped, her pencil leaving an unwanted mark across her page. She turned to find a young woman about her own age watching her with amused eyes. The woman wore a simple calico dress and carried a basket over one arm. "You are staring quite obviously." He is handsome, I will grant you, but half the unmarried women in Council Bluffs have set their caps for him, and he remains stubbornly unattached. Eleanor felt her cheeks heat. I was not. That is, I am an artist. I was merely observing him from a professional standpoint. The young woman laughed, a pleasant sound without malice. Oh, I believe you. Your sketchbook rather gives you away. I am Sarah Morgan, by the way. My father owns the dry goods store, Eleanor Harper. I just arrived yesterday from Philadelphia. An artist from Philadelphia, Sarah said thoughtfully. How exciting. We rarely get anyone truly interesting passing through. Most people are just on their way somewhere else. What brings you to Council Bluffs specifically? I wanted to paint the West, Eleanor explained. The real West, not the sanitized versions people back east imagine. Well, Xavier Ellsworth is certainly real West, Sarah said, glancing back at the man in question who had now disappeared into the general store. His family owns one of the largest ranches in the area, the Triple E, spread about 8 miles north of town. He and his brothers run cattle and horses. Xavier handles most of the horse breaking and training. People come from 3 counties over to buy Ellsworth horses. Eleanor's interest sharpened. A ranch would be perfect for her painting, exactly the authentic setting she needed. Do you think his family would allow me to paint there? I would be happy to offer some of my work in exchange for permission to spend time on their property. Sarah's expression grew doubtful. I do not know. The Ellsworths keep mostly to themselves. Xavier comes to town for supplies and occasionally for entertainment, but they are not particularly social people. You could ask, I suppose. Xavier is decent enough, not like some of the rough men around here. He would probably at least be polite in his refusal. Before Eleanor could respond, the subject of their conversation emerged from the store carrying several burlap sacks over his shoulder as if they weighed nothing. He loaded them into his saddlebags with efficient movements, checked the cinch on his saddle, and swung back up onto his horse. For just a moment, his gaze swept across the street, and his eyes met Eleanor's. She felt the impact like a physical thing, a jolt that went straight through her chest. Then he touched his hand to his hat brim in a brief acknowledgement and urged his horse into motion, heading back out of town at an easy lope. He saw you sketching him, Sarah said, sounding both amused and sympathetic. Try not to be too embarrassed. As I said, Xavier is used to female attention. He handles it more gracefully than most men would. But Eleanor barely heard her new friend's words. Her mind was racing with ideas and images. The way Xavier Ellsworth moved, the unconscious poetry of his physical presence, the sense of belonging she had glimpsed in how he handled his horse and navigated his world. This was what she had come west to find. Not just landscapes and buildings, but people who were truly part of this place, shaped by it and shaping it in turn. I need to go to his ranch, Eleanor said decisively. I need to paint him. Sarah's eyebrows rose. I think you might be more forward than most Philadelphia ladies I have heard about. Not him specifically, Eleanor amended, though she knew that was not entirely true. The ranch, the work, the way of life. But yes, he would be an ideal subject. There is something about him, something authentic and real. He would be perfect. Well, if you are determined, you could ride out there, Sarah suggested. Though that brings us back to the problem of propriety. A young single woman cannot simply show up at a ranch full of men and ask to spend time there. The scandal would be immense, and Mrs. Patterson would probably throw you out of her boarding house. Eleanor sighed. Sarah was right, of course. The restrictions placed on women, even out here in the supposedly freer West, were immense and frustrating. But she had not come all this way to be stopped by social conventions. What if I had a chaperone? Eleanor asked. Someone respectable to accompany me. That might work, Sarah said slowly. Though finding someone willing to spend hours at her ranch while you paint could be difficult, most respectable women have their own responsibilities to attend to. She paused, thinking. My Aunt Martha might be convinced. She is a widow, quite respectable, and she has known the Ellsworth family for years. If anyone could make the arrangement acceptable, it would be her. Of course, you would still need the Ellsworths to agree. Could you introduce me to your aunt? Eleanor asked eagerly. And perhaps help me compose a letter to the Ellsworth family explaining my request. Sarah smiled. You really are determined, are you not? Yes, I can help you. Come to dinner at our house tonight. My mother would love to meet you anyway. She adores anything artistic, and we get so little culture out here. And I will send a message to Aunt Martha to join us. They arranged the details, and Eleanor spent the rest of the morning exploring more of the town, her sketchbook filling with images. But her mind kept returning to those few moments watching Xavier Ellsworth, the way he moved through space like water flowing, all unconscious grace and contained power. She had painted hundreds of people in her career, but something told her that capturing him on canvas would be different, more challenging and more rewarding than anything she had attempted before. That evening, Eleanor presented herself at the Morgan house, a comfortable two-story home behind the dry goods store. Sarah's mother, Hannah Morgan, was a warm woman with graying blonde hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She welcomed Eleanor enthusiastically, clearly delighted to have a real artist at her dinner table. Sarah's father, Benjamin, was quieter but equally kind, and he asked intelligent questions about Eleanor's training and work. Aunt Martha arrived just as they sat down to eat. Martha Crawford was perhaps 50, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Eleanor of some of her teachers at the Art Academy. Over pot roast and potatoes, Eleanor explained her desire to paint authentic Western scenes and her particular interest in ranch life. The Ellsworth Ranch, Martha said thoughtfully. That would certainly give you what you are looking for. Robert Ellsworth, the father, runs a good operation. He has 3 sons. Xavier is the middle one, 26 years old, I believe. Fine young men, all of them, though they have had their share of tragedy. Their mother died when the boys were young, and they have had to make their own way without a woman's influence for many years. Would Mr. Ellsworth be receptive to having me paint there? Eleanor asked. I would not interfere with any work, and I would be happy to compensate them for their time. Martha studied Eleanor carefully, her gaze assessing. You are serious about your art, are you not? This is not just a young woman's fancy or adventure. It is my life, Eleanor said simply. It is the only thing I have ever wanted to do, the only thing I am truly good at. I need to grow as an artist, and I cannot do that by painting the same safe subjects over and over. I need to be challenged. I need to see and capture things that matter. Something in her words or her tone must have satisfied Martha, because the older woman nodded slowly. Very well. I will accompany you out to the Triple E tomorrow. I need to deliver some preserves to Robert anyway. He has a terrible sweet tooth, and I promised him my strawberry jam. We will go in the morning when it is cooler. I warn you, though, Robert Ellsworth is not an easy man. He is fair and honest, but he does not suffer fools, and he is protective of his sons and his land. You will need to convince him that you are genuine and that your presence will not be a disruption. Eleanor felt a flutter of nervous excitement. I understand. Thank you so much for giving me this chance. The next morning dawned with a brilliant pink and gold sunrise that Eleanor wished she had time to paint, but Martha arrived at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house promptly at 7 o'clock, driving a small buggy pulled by a steady-looking bay horse. Eleanor climbed up beside her with her art supplies carefully stowed in the back. The ride out to the Triple E Ranch took about 45 minutes. The road led north from Council Bluffs through rolling prairie land that gradually gave way to more varied terrain. Eleanor saw her first real cattle, long horns with massive spreads of horn that looked dangerous and prehistoric. They grazed in scattered groups across the golden grassland, and in the distance, Eleanor could see men on horseback moving among them. The Ellsworths run about 2,000 head, Martha explained as they drove. They drive cattle to market twice a year, and they have contracts with the army and several reservations to provide beef. But Robert's real love is horses. He has been breeding quality stock for almost 20 years, and the Ellsworth reputation is solid throughout Iowa and Nebraska. The ranch buildings came into view gradually. The main house was a long, low structure built of wood and stone with a wide porch running across the front. Several outbuildings clustered nearby: a large barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and various sheds and work structures. Everything looked well maintained and functional, built for use rather than beauty, but possessing a certain austere attractiveness nonetheless. As Martha pulled the buggy to a stop near the main house, Eleanor noticed several men working in one of the corrals. Her heart skipped when she recognized Xavier's lean figure among them. He and another man were working with a young horse, taking turns approaching and retreating while the animal watched them with wary eyes. An older man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He was perhaps 55, with graying dark hair and the same striking pale eyes as Xavier. Robert Ellsworth, Eleanor assumed. He moved with the slightly stiff gait of someone whose body carried years of hard work and old injuries. "Martha," he greeted, his voice a deep rumble. "Good to see you. You did not have to bring the jam all the way out here. I would have collected it in town." "I know you would never actually remember to do so," Martha replied tartly, climbing down from the buggy with practiced ease. "Robert, I want to introduce you to someone. This is Miss Eleanor Harper, an artist from Philadelphia. She has come west to paint, and she is interested in capturing authentic ranch life." Robert's pale eyes fixed on Eleanor with an intensity that made her want to squirm, but she held his gaze steadily. "An artist," he said, his tone neutral but not welcoming. "We are working people here, Miss Harper. We do not have time for entertaining visitors or posing for pictures." "I do not need entertaining, and I do not want to paint posed pictures," Eleanor said firmly. She climbed down from the buggy and pulled out her portfolio. "May I show you some of my work, Mr. Ellsworth? I think it might help explain what I hope to accomplish." He looked like he might refuse, but Martha gave him a look that apparently carried weight because he sighed and gestured toward the house. "Come inside, then. I need coffee anyway." The interior of the house was Spartan but clean, furnished with heavy practical furniture, and lacking any decorative touches that might have been added by a woman's hand. Robert poured coffee for all three of them from a pot sitting on the massive cast iron stove, and they settled at the long kitchen table. Eleanor opened her portfolio, spreading out her recent work. She had brought examples deliberately chosen to show her technical skill, but also her interest in real life and real people. There was a drawing of dock workers in Philadelphia, their muscles straining as they loaded cargo. A painting of an old woman selling flowers on a street corner, her face a map of hard years. Sketches of animals, horses, dogs, a cat sleeping in a window, and several landscape pieces from her journey west, capturing the play of light across prairie grass and the vast, empty sky. Robert studied each piece carefully, taking his time. His calloused fingers touched the edges of the paper gently, with unexpected delicacy. "You have talent," he said finally. "Real talent, not just dabbling. These are honest. They show work and life as they actually are." That is what I want to do, Eleanor said earnestly. I want to paint the truth of this place and this life. Not romantic fantasies for people who will never leave their parlors back east, but real images of real work done by real people. Your ranch, the way your men work with the cattle and horses, the landscape, the buildings, all of it is exactly what I am looking for. Why? Robert asked bluntly. Why does a young woman from Philadelphia care about any of this? Eleanor considered her answer carefully. Because it matters. Because this life you live out here, building something from nothing, working with the land and the animals, it is important and valuable, and most people will never see it or understand it. Art is how we preserve truth, how we show people things they might never experience otherwise. And selfishly, because I need to grow. I need to challenge myself with difficult subjects, with real substance. I cannot do that painting society portraits and vases of flowers. Robert was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. Then he said, My wife loved art. She used to draw before she died. Nothing professional like you, just sketches for her own pleasure. She drew the boys when they were small, the horses, the view from the porch. I still have her sketchbooks packed away upstairs. She would have liked you, I think. She would have appreciated what you are trying to do. Eleanor felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. I would be honored to carry on that tradition in some small way. Martha would chaperone, Robert asked, glancing at the older woman. When I am able, Martha confirmed. My own responsibilities permitting. But yes, I would be happy to accompany Eleanor when she visits, and I think you know I would not permit any impropriety or disruption to your household. Robert nodded slowly. All right, you can come paint, Miss Harper, but I have conditions. You do not interfere with work. You do not distract my men or my sons from their duties. You stay out of the way when we are handling cattle or breaking horses, because both are dangerous, and I will not be responsible for injuries caused by your inattention. And if at any point I decide your presence is more trouble than it is worth, the arrangement ends immediately. I understand and agree completely, Eleanor said quickly, relief and excitement flooding through her. Thank you, Mr. Ellsworth. You will not regret this. We will see, he said gruffly, but there was something that might have been a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You can start today if you want. Martha, why do you not show her around while I get back to work? Miss Harper, you are welcome to set up wherever you like as long as you follow the rules I just outlined. He stood, clearly considering the conversation finished, and headed back outside. Eleanor gathered her portfolio with shaking hands. This was really happening. She was going to have access to everything she had hoped for. Martha showed her around the ranch yard, explaining the purpose of each building and introducing her to several of the ranch hands who were working nearby. The men were polite, but clearly puzzled by her presence. A woman artist was apparently not something they encountered regularly. Eleanor eventually settled on a spot near one of the corrals where she had a good view of the men working with horses. She set up her portable easel, arranged her paints and brushes, and prepared a fresh canvas. For several minutes, she just watched, studying the scene and planning her composition. Xavier and the other man, who Martha identified as his younger brother Nathan, were still working with the young horse. They moved with infinite patience, never rushing, never forcing. When the horse would allow them close enough, they would stroke its neck or shoulder, murmuring in low voices Eleanor could not quite hear. Then they would step back, giving the animal space to process. It was like a dance, three beings moving together toward mutual understanding. Eleanor began to sketch quickly in charcoal, blocking out the basic composition. She wanted to capture the relationship between the men and the horse, the patience and respect that characterized their interaction. Her hands moved with sure confidence across the canvas, the familiar ritual of creation taking over. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not notice when the men finished with the young horse and led it back to the barn. She did not notice Martha leaving to help with something in the house. She did not notice the sun rising higher, the heat intensifying. All her awareness had narrowed to the canvas and the image emerging on its surface. "That is good," a voice said behind her, and Eleanor jumped, her brush leaving an unintended mark across her painting. She spun around to find Xavier Ellsworth standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands and sweat glistening on his face from his work. Up close, he was even more striking than she had realized. His pale eyes were intelligent and thoughtful, with small lines at the corners that suggested he smiled often. A small scar crossed his left eyebrow, and his nose had been broken at some point and healed slightly crooked. He smelled like horse and leather and clean sweat, not unpleasant. "I am sorry," he said, noticing her startled reaction. "I did not mean to frighten you. I just wanted to see what you were working on. Pa said you were an artist from back east." Eleanor looked back at her canvas, dismayed by the charcoal smudge her brush had left. But when she examined it more closely, she realized the accidental mark actually enhanced the sense of movement in the piece. Sometimes happy accidents happened. "Yes, I am from Philadelphia," she said, trying to calm her racing heart. Having him this close was doing strange things to her equilibrium. "Your father was kind enough to give me permission to paint here. He said you want to show real ranch life," Xavier said, stepping slightly closer to examine her canvas. "Not romantic nonsense." "Exactly. Too much Western art is pure fantasy, painted by people who have never been further west than the Hudson River. I want to capture the truth." Xavier studied her painting silently. She had blocked out the basic composition showing two men and a horse in the corral, with suggestions of the ranch buildings in the background. The figures were still rough, but the relationship between them was already evident in their positioning and body language. "You saw us," Xavier said quietly. "Really saw us, what we were doing and why. Most people watch us work with horses and they think it looks easy or they do not understand why we take so much time. But you caught it, the patience and respect. That is the heart of what we do." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. For an artist, being truly seen and understood in one's work was incredibly rare and precious. "Thank you. That is exactly what I was hoping to convey." Xavier glanced at her face then, and their eyes met directly for the first time. Eleanor felt that same jolt she had experienced in town, like touching a live wire. The moment stretched between them, filled with an awareness that went beyond words. She noticed details, the exact color of his irises, a mix of blue and gray with flecks of darker color around the pupil. The fullness of his lower lip, the strong line of his jaw beneath several days' stubble, the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength evident in every line of his body. "I should get back to work," Xavier said, but he did not move immediately. "Will you be coming back? To paint, I mean." "If your father continues to allow it, yes," Eleanor replied. "I would like to create a whole series of paintings showing different aspects of ranch life." "Good," Xavier said simply. Then he settled his hat back on his head, touched the brim in a small salute, and walked toward the barn. Eleanor watched him go, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. She had been around handsome men before. She had painted male models in her art classes, studied the male form in great detail. But something about Xavier Ellsworth affected her differently, reaching past her artist's eye to something deeper and more personal. She forced herself to turn back to her canvas, but she found her concentration broken. Instead of the working scene, she pulled out her sketchbook and began drawing Xavier from memory. Her pencil flew across the page, capturing the line of his profile, the set of his shoulders, the way his hand rested on his hip when he stood thinking. The sketches poured out of her, one after another, each trying to capture some essential quality she had glimpsed in him. "Careful," Martha said, appearing at Eleanor's elbow and making her jump for the second time that afternoon. "That is the look of a woman in danger of falling." "I am simply studying an interesting subject," Eleanor protested, but she felt her cheeks heat. Martha smiled knowingly. "Of course you are, dear. And Xavier Ellsworth is certainly an interesting subject. But remember, you came here to paint, not to become entangled in romantic complications." "I know," Eleanor said, closing her sketchbook quickly. "I know. Art has to come first. It always has to come first." But even as she said the words, she felt a small doubt creeping in. What if, for once, there could be room in her life for both? What if she did not have to choose? They stayed at the ranch until late afternoon, then drove back to Council Bluffs in the cooler evening air. Eleanor's mind raced with ideas for paintings, but it kept circling back to Xavier, to the sound of his voice and the intensity of his gaze, and the way he moved through his world with such unconscious grace. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor established a routine. 3 or 4 times a week, weather permitting, she would ride out to the Triple E Ranch with Martha or occasionally with Sarah Morgan, who was curious enough about Eleanor's project to serve as chaperone on her days off from helping at her father's store. Eleanor painted and sketched everything: the ranch buildings against the vast sky, cattle grazing across the prairie, horses in the corrals, men working with rope and leather. She painted Robert Ellsworth standing on his porch at sunset, his weathered face reflecting satisfaction as he surveyed his domain. She painted Nathan, the youngest brother, laughing at something another ranch hand said, his youth and optimism captured in the tilt of his head. And she painted Xavier. Again and again, she found herself drawn to him as a subject. Xavier breaking a horse with patient persistence. Xavier repairing tack in the barn, his strong hands working the leather with practiced skill. Xavier at the end of a long day, hat pushed back, face tired but content. She told herself it was because he was simply an excellent representative of Western ranch life, the perfect embodiment of what she had come west to capture. But she knew, in her honest moments, that it was more than that. Xavier seemed equally aware of her presence. He would pause in his work sometimes and watch her paint, not interfering but simply observing with those pale, perceptive eyes. Sometimes he would ask questions about her process or her training. He was more educated than she had initially assumed, which should not have surprised her. Ignorance and lack of formal schooling were not the same thing, and Xavier was clearly intelligent and curious about the world beyond his ranch. "Did you always want to be an artist?" he asked one afternoon when he found her taking a break in the shade of the barn, drinking water from the jar she brought with her. "For as long as I can remember," Eleanor replied. "Even as a child, I would draw everything I saw. My father encouraged it, paid for lessons and art school. My mother was less enthusiastic. She wanted me to focus on being a proper society lady, finding a good husband, running a household. The idea of actually trying to make a career of art horrified her." "But you came west anyway," Xavier observed, even knowing it would disappoint her. "My father died 6 months ago," Eleanor said quietly. "That changed everything. He was the one who really understood my passion for art. After he was gone, I realized I could not spend the rest of my life doing what was expected rather than what I truly wanted. So I took my inheritance and came west." "That was brave," Xavier said. "Leaving everything familiar, coming to a place you had never been with no guarantee things would work out. Or foolish," Eleanor suggested with a slight smile. "No," Xavier said firmly. Brave. Foolishness is doing something without understanding the risks. You knew the risks and came anyway. That is courage. His words touched something deep inside her, a place that had not been acknowledged or validated in a long time. Thank you. Not everyone sees it that way. Their loss, Xavier said simply. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the activity in the ranch yard. Then Xavier said, "There is a place I want to show you if you think you might want to paint it. It is about a mile from here, up in the hills. A spring feeds a small pool and cottonwood trees grow around it. It is the prettiest spot on our land, but most people never see it because it is not near any of our regular work areas." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "That sounds wonderful. When could we go?" "Tomorrow afternoon," Xavier suggested. Pa is taking a group of hands to move some cattle further north, and Nathan is going to town for supplies. I could take you up there without neglecting any crucial work. "I will need a chaperone," Eleanor said reluctantly. Xavier's expression clouded slightly. "Right, of course. Could you arrange for someone to come?" "I will ask Martha," Eleanor promised. "She has been very generous with her time." But the next day, when Martha's turn came to accompany Eleanor to the ranch, the older woman looked exhausted. "I am so sorry, dear," she said over breakfast at the Morgan house where Eleanor had come to meet her. "I was up all night with my neighbor's sick child. The mother was at her wit's end, and I could not refuse to help. I am too tired to make that drive out to the ranch today." Eleanor's disappointment must have shown on her face because Sarah suddenly spoke up. "I could go. Father can spare me from the store today. We are not busy on Tuesdays." But when they arrived at the ranch, they discovered that Sarah's sister had sent an urgent message asking her to come immediately. There was some crisis with wedding planning. Sarah was getting married in the fall, and apparently a dispute with the dressmaker needed immediate resolution. "I am so sorry," Sarah said, clearly torn. "I have to go handle this. Catherine will make herself sick with worry if I do not." "It is fine," Eleanor assured her, though her disappointment was keen. She had been looking forward to seeing the spring Xavier had described, and more honestly, to spending time with him away from the bustle of the ranch yard. Xavier emerged from the barn as Sarah's buggy pulled away, leaving Eleanor standing alone. His expression changed when he saw her by herself. "Is everything all right?" he asked, walking over to her. Eleanor explained the situation, ending with, "So I am afraid I cannot go to see the spring after all, not without a chaperone." Xavier was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. Then he said, "What if we took my brother?" "Nathan is still here. The trip to town was postponed until tomorrow. With him along, it would be perfectly proper. 2 men and a woman on a short ride to a scenic location." Eleanor considered this. Having Nathan along would technically satisfy the requirement for propriety, though she suspected some of the more rigid social critics would still disapprove. But she was tired of having her work constrained by endless petty rules. "Yes," she decided. "That sounds fine. Let me gather my painting supplies." Nathan Ellsworth turned out to be 21, sandy-haired, and possessed of an easy charm that was quite different from Xavier's quieter intensity. He joked and chatted easily as the 3 of them rode north from the ranch buildings. Eleanor on a gentle mare that Xavier assured her was completely trustworthy. The landscape grew more interesting as they climbed into low hills, covered with prairie grass and scattered wildflowers. Eleanor wished she could stop every few yards to sketch, but she contented herself with mental notes, filing away images and color combinations for future paintings. The spring was everything Xavier had promised. Water bubbled up from between rocks to form a clear pool perhaps 20 feet across, surrounded by cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. The grass here was greener and lusher than the surrounding prairie, and wildflowers grew in profusion, their colors bright against the gold and green backdrop. "Oh," Eleanor breathed, stopping her horse and just looking. "Oh, this is perfect." Xavier smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "I thought you might appreciate it." They dismounted, and Eleanor immediately began setting up her easel while the men saw to the horses. Nathan sprawled in the shade of a cottonwood tree, clearly viewing this as a pleasant break from work rather than any kind of duty. "I am going to check the game trails up higher," Nathan announced after about 15 minutes. "Make sure nothing has been bothering the cattle that graze up this way. Xavier, you stay with Miss Harper. I will be back in an hour or so." Before either Xavier or Eleanor could respond, Nathan had mounted his horse and ridden off, whistling cheerfully. They looked at each other, both realizing simultaneously that they were now alone together, completely out of sight of the ranch or any other people. "I am sorry," Xavier said immediately. "Nathan should not have left. I will ride after him." "No," Eleanor said, surprising herself with her decisiveness. "No, do not. I trust you, Xavier, and honestly, I am tired of the constant scrutiny and judgment. We are two adults having a conversation in broad daylight. If society considers that scandalous, then perhaps society's rules need to change." Xavier's eyebrows rose, but he did not argue. "You are not what I expected," he said after a moment. "When Pa said an artist from Philadelphia wanted to paint at the ranch, I pictured someone completely different. More fragile, I suppose. More concerned with propriety and appearances. I disappointed enough people by coming west in the first place," Eleanor said, beginning to mix paints on her palette. "At a certain point, you realize you cannot live your entire life worried about what others think." "That must have been difficult," Xavier said. "Going against what your family and friends expected." "It was liberating," Eleanor replied honestly. "Frightening, but liberating." She began to paint, blocking out the composition of the spring and the surrounding trees. Xavier watched for a while, then said, "May I ask you something?" "Of course. Why do you paint me so often?" His voice was curious rather than accusatory. "I have noticed that I appear in your sketches more than anyone else at the ranch." Eleanor felt her face heat, but she forced herself to answer honestly. "You are a fascinating subject. The way you move, the way you work with the horses, there is an unconscious grace to it that is rare. Most people are self-conscious in their bodies, aware of being observed and adjusting their movements accordingly. But you are simply yourself, completely present in whatever you are doing. That authenticity is difficult to capture, but when you do, it makes for powerful art." "Is that all?" Xavier asked quietly. "Just artistic interest," Eleanor's hand stilled on her brush. She could lie, maintain professional distance, keep herself safe from the vulnerability of admitting her growing feelings. Or she could be honest, risk rejection and complication, but honor the truth of what she felt. "No," she said, not looking at him. "That is not all. From the first moment I saw you in town, something in me recognized something in you. I do not have words for it exactly, but being near you feels right in a way nothing else has. When I paint you, I am trying to understand that feeling, to capture whatever it is that draws me so strongly." The silence that followed felt enormous. Eleanor kept her eyes fixed on her canvas, her heart pounding so hard she was sure Xavier must be able to hear it. She had never been so forward with a man, never so honest about her feelings. The risk felt terrifying. Then Xavier moved, coming to stand beside her. "Eleanor," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like music. "Look at me." She turned, forcing herself to meet his gaze. His pale eyes were intense, filled with an emotion she was afraid to name. "I have been trying to find excuses to be near you," Xavier admitted. I volunteer for jobs I would normally hand off to the men, just because they put me in your line of sight. I watch you paint, and I think about how your face looks when you are completely absorbed in your work, like nothing else in the world exists. At night, I lie awake thinking about the sound of your voice, the way you gesture with your hands when you are excited about something. Eleanor's breath caught. Xavier, I know we have only known each other 2 weeks, he continued. I know you came here to paint, not to become involved with a rancher. I know 100 reasons why this makes no sense, but I cannot stop feeling what I feel. You are the most fascinating, genuine person I have ever met. When I am with you, I feel more alive than I have in years. The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, standing close enough now that Eleanor could feel the heat radiating from his body. She reached up, almost without conscious decision, and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. His stubble rasped against her palm. You are the masterpiece I have been seeking, Eleanor whispered. All my life, I have been looking for something worth capturing, something true and real and beautiful. And here you are, more perfect than anything I could have imagined. Xavier's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his face. I am no masterpiece. I am just a man who breaks horses and works cattle. You are everything, Eleanor said fiercely. You are honor and strength and kindness and patience. You are part of this land in a way I am still trying to understand. You are exactly what I came west to find. Xavier leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Eleanor did not want to pull away. She had never wanted anything less. When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home to a place she had never been. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but when Eleanor responded, her free hand coming up to grip his shirt, it deepened into something more intense. Xavier's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Eleanor melted into him, feeling the solid strength of his body against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that since the first moment I saw you sketching on Main Street, he admitted. I have wanted you to do that since the first moment I saw you ride up, Eleanor replied. They stood together in the dappled shade of the cottonwoods, the spring burbling musically nearby, and Eleanor felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was not what she had planned. She had come west for art, for professional growth, for independence. But somehow, impossibly, she had found something more. Or perhaps it had found her. Over the next weeks, Eleanor and Xavier grew closer in ways both large and small. He began teaching her more about horses, patiently explaining the philosophy behind his training methods. She discovered that his approach came from observation and respect, rather than dominance and force. He read the animal's body language, worked with their natural instincts rather than against them. Watching him work was like watching a master craftsman, someone who had elevated a necessary job to the level of art. Eleanor painted constantly, producing canvas after canvas of ranch life. But increasingly, she found herself painting Xavier specifically, trying to capture not just his physical presence but something of his character, his essential nature. She painted him gentling a skittish horse, his entire focus on the animal. She painted him laughing with his brothers, his face open and joyful. She painted him at sunset, looking out over his family's land with an expression of deep contentment. They stole moments together when they could, though always mindful of the need for discretion. Xavier would find excuses to show her different parts of the ranch, always with someone nearby for propriety's sake, but managing to create small pockets of privacy for conversation and occasionally for stolen kisses. Eleanor had never felt so alive, so fully engaged with both her art and her heart. Robert Ellsworth watched their growing attachment with what appeared to be cautious approval. One evening, as Eleanor was packing up her supplies to return to town, he approached her alone. "My son cares for you," he said without preamble. "I see it in how he looks at you, how he lights up when you arrive." "I care for him as well," Eleanor said honestly. "Very much." Robert nodded slowly. "Xavier has not been serious about a woman since he was barely 20. There was a girl then, daughter of a rancher to the east. She seemed suitable, and we all thought they would marry. But she could not handle ranch life, could not adapt to the isolation and hard work. She broke it off and married a store owner in Omaha. It hurt Xavier badly, made him cautious about trusting his heart again." "I am not that girl," Eleanor said quietly. "I did not come here looking for easy or comfortable. I came looking for real." "I know," Robert said. "That is why I am telling you this. Xavier deserves someone who truly sees and values him, who will not ask him to be something he is not. I think you might be that person. But if you have any doubts, if you think you might eventually want to return east to your old life, you should be honest about that now. It would be kinder than letting things go further and then breaking his heart." Eleanor met his eyes steadily. "My old life feels like it belongs to someone else now. Everything I want is here. The work, the landscape, the freedom to paint what matters. And yes, Xavier, most especially Xavier, I do not know where this is leading, but I know I want to find out." Robert's stern expression softened slightly. "Good. That is what I hope to hear. Xavier is a grown man and makes his own choices, but he is still my son, and I want to see him happy. You make him happy, Miss Harper. I see it clearly." That conversation stayed with Eleanor as summer moved deeper into Iowa. The heat intensified, making midday work difficult, so she adjusted her schedule to paint in the early mornings and late afternoons. The light at those times was more interesting anyway, golden and dramatic rather than the flat white glare of noon. She had been in Council Bluffs for almost 2 months when Xavier asked her to go riding with him one Sunday. Their one day when work on the ranch was minimal. They rode north into the hills, Nathan trailing at a discreet distance as chaperone, though he tactfully remained far enough back to give them the illusion of privacy. Xavier led her to a high point that overlooked the ranch and the prairie beyond. From here, Eleanor could see for miles in every direction, the land rolling away in gentle waves to the horizon. The sky arched overhead, impossibly blue and vast. "This is my favorite place on the ranch," Xavier said as they sat their horses side by side. "When I need to think or when I am troubled about something, I come here. Something about seeing everything laid out like this helps me get perspective." "It is beautiful," Eleanor said, already composing the scene in her mind, thinking about how she would capture the sense of space and freedom. "Eleanor," Xavier said, and something in his tone made her turn to look at him. "I need to tell you something. Actually, I need to ask you something." Her heart began to race. "All right." Xavier dismounted and came to help her down from her horse, his hands strong and steady on her waist. He kept hold of her hands once her feet were on the ground, his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on her palms. "I know we have only known each other for 2 months," he began. "I know that is not very long, not by most people's standards, but in those 2 months, you have become essential to me. I look forward to seeing you with an intensity that probably should worry me. When you are not here, the ranch feels empty even though it is full of activity. I find myself thinking about what you would say about things, how you would see situations. You have changed how I look at everything." "You have done the same for me," Eleanor said, her voice shaking slightly. "Before I came here, my entire world was about art. Nothing else mattered, nothing else got past my defenses. But you have become as important to me as painting, maybe more important, and that terrifies me and exhilarates me in equal measure." Xavier smiled, that slow, beautiful smile that transformed his face. Then maybe we are both terrified and exhilarated together. Eleanor, I am not good with fancy words. I am a simple man with a simple life, but I love you. I love your passion and your courage and your honesty. I love how you see beauty in things other people overlook. I love your dedication to your art and how your face looks when you are painting. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Xavier. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, simple but beautiful, a single deep blue stone set in silver. This was my mother's, Xavier said. My grandmother brought it from her family in Germany, and my grandfather gave it to her when they were married. Ma wore it every day until she died, and Pa gave it to me years ago, said I would know when I met the woman I wanted to give it to. Eleanor Harper, will you marry me? Will you stay here and make a life with me? I know it is not the life you planned. I know there will be hardships and challenges. But I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy, trying to be worthy of you. Eleanor laughed through her tears. Worthy of me? Xavier, you are the most extraordinary person I have ever met. Yes, of course I will marry you. There is nothing I want more. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, the blue stone catching the sunlight. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak. Eleanor clung to him, her hands fisted in his shirt, kissing him back with everything she felt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. You have made me the happiest man alive. We have made each other happy, Eleanor corrected. That is how it should be. Nathan, who had apparently been watching from his distant vantage point, let out a whoop and came galloping up to them. It is about time, he crowed. I thought you were going to spend the whole afternoon staring at each other before you finally asked her. Xavier laughed, his arm still secure around Eleanor's waist. Did Pa put you up to watching us? He might have mentioned that you were planning to propose today, Nathan admitted with a grin. He wanted to make sure everything went well. So, Eleanor, welcome to the family. You are taking on a stubborn, hard-headed man, but he has his good points. I am well aware of both his stubbornness and his good points, Eleanor replied, smiling up at Xavier. And I would not change anything about him. They rode back to the ranch in high spirits, and the news of the engagement spread quickly. Robert embraced Eleanor warmly, his weathered face creased in a genuine smile. Welcome, daughter, he said simply, and Eleanor felt emotion clog her throat. Her own father had been gone for less than a year, and she missed him with an ache that never quite went away. Having Robert's approval and acceptance meant more than she could express. That evening, they had an impromptu celebration dinner. The ranch hands crowded into the main house, and someone produced a fiddle. There was music and laughter and toasts drunk to the happy couple. Eleanor sat beside Xavier, his hand clasped firmly in hers, and felt a contentment she had never experienced before. This was home, she realized. Not Philadelphia with its culture and civilization, but this rough ranch house full of weathered, genuine people who worked hard and lived honestly. Sarah and Martha came out the next day when they heard the news, along with Hannah Morgan and several other women from town, whom Eleanor had befriended over the past months. They exclaimed over the ring and demanded details about the proposal, and Eleanor found herself the center of female attention in a way that felt surprisingly pleasant. When will the wedding be? Sarah asked eagerly. Please say soon. I would love for us to have a double wedding, or at least for mine to have another exciting event near it. Eleanor glanced at Xavier, who had stayed close by her side throughout the day. We have not discussed specifics yet, but I see no reason to wait long, unless Xavier wants a long engagement. "I would marry you tomorrow if it were possible," Xavier said bluntly, making several of the women laugh. "But I suppose we should allow some time for planning and preparations." They settled on early September, about 6 weeks away. That would give them time to make arrangements but not drag things out unnecessarily. Neither Eleanor nor Xavier were interested in elaborate social productions. They wanted a simple ceremony that would allow them to start their life together. Eleanor wrote to her mother and sisters in Philadelphia, informing them of her engagement. She tried to explain about Xavier and the ranch and the life she was choosing, but she knew they would not really understand. Her mother's reply arrived 3 weeks later, predictably full of disappointment and dire warnings about the hardships of frontier life. But there was also a grudging acceptance, and a small hope expressed that Eleanor would find happiness in her unconventional choice. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor continued to paint, determined to build up a portfolio of work that she could eventually sell or exhibit. Her art had not become less important just because she was getting married. If anything, her love for Xavier had deepened her understanding of beauty and meaning, making her work stronger and more emotionally resonant. She painted a special portrait of Xavier as her wedding gift to him. She worked on it in secret, using sketches and her memory of his features rather than having him sit for her. She wanted to capture not just his physical appearance but something of his essential character, his strength and gentleness and integrity. It was perhaps the best work she had ever done, and when she finally showed it to him 2 days before their wedding, he stared at it in silence for a long moment. "Is that really how you see me?" he asked quietly. "That is exactly how I see you," Eleanor confirmed. "That is who you are to me." Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I am grateful every single day." The wedding took place on a perfect September morning, the air crisp and clear after weeks of summer heat. They were married in the small church in Council Bluffs, with the minister who had baptized all 3 Ellsworth boys performing the ceremony. Eleanor wore a simple but elegant dress that Mrs. Webb had helped her sew, cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Sarah served as her bridesmaid, and Nathan stood up with Xavier. The church was packed with friends and neighbors, more people than Eleanor had realized she had come to know in her months in Iowa. The Ellsworth name carried weight in the community, and people were curious about the Eastern artist who had won Xavier's heart. But Eleanor barely noticed the watching crowd. Her entire focus was on Xavier, standing tall and handsome in his best suit, his pale eyes locked on hers as she walked down the aisle toward him. The ceremony itself passed in a sort of haze. Eleanor heard herself making her vows, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. She heard Xavier promise to love and cherish her, his deep voice resonant with sincerity. Then the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Xavier kissed her, and applause broke out among the assembled guests. The reception was held at the Morgan house, which had more space than the ranch. Hannah had outdone herself with food and decorations, transforming her home into something festive and special. There was music and dancing, and Eleanor found herself swept into celebration with an enthusiasm that surprised her. She had never been one for large social gatherings, but this felt different. These people were not judging her or finding her wanting. They were genuinely happy for her and Xavier, welcoming her into their community. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor and Xavier managed to steal a few moments alone in the garden behind the house. Xavier pulled her into his arms, swaying gently to the music drifting from inside. "Happy?" he asked, his lips close to her ear. "More than I knew was possible," Eleanor replied honestly. I came west looking for inspiration for my art, and I found an entire life I never knew I wanted. I thought I knew exactly what my life would be, Xavier said. Work the ranch. Maybe eventually find a practical woman to marry who understood ranch life, raise children, grow old doing the same things my father did. But then you arrived with your easel and your sketchbooks and your fierce determination, and everything changed. You made me see my own life differently, appreciate things I had taken for granted. You gave me a gift, Eleanor, even before today. We gave each other gifts, Eleanor said, reaching up to touch his face. That is what love is supposed to be, I think. Not one person sacrificing for the other, but both people becoming more fully themselves because of each other. They kissed, slow and sweet, savoring this moment of peace before returning to their celebration. Later, as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, they said their goodbyes and drove back to the ranch in Xavier's wagon. Eleanor had moved her belongings out to the ranch over the past week, taking over 2 rooms on the second floor of the main house that Xavier had prepared for her. One would be their bedroom, and the other she would use as a studio, taking advantage of the excellent north light. Robert had diplomatically announced that he would be staying in the bunkhouse for the next few days, giving the newlyweds privacy in the main house. Nathan had moved to the bunkhouse weeks ago, making space and avoiding any awkwardness. Eleanor was grateful for their thoughtfulness, even as she felt slightly embarrassed by the obviousness of the arrangement. Their wedding night was both awkward and wonderful in the way of first times between people who loved each other, but were still learning each other's bodies. Xavier was patient and gentle, attentive to Eleanor's responses, and despite her nervousness, Eleanor found herself responding with a passion that surprised them both. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Xavier's arms secure around her, and Eleanor felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I did not think I could be this happy." "I love you too," Xavier replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And we have the rest of our lives to be even happier." The early days of their marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Eleanor had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and the hard physical work that filled every day. She helped where she could, cooking meals and managing the household, though she was not particularly skilled at domestic tasks initially. Robert and Nathan were patient with her efforts, and gradually she improved. But Eleanor did not give up her art. Xavier would not have wanted her to, and she would not have been happy if she had. She painted every day, sometimes for hours, building up a body of work that grew stronger and more confident. She sent several paintings back east to a gallery owner she had worked with in Philadelphia, and to her delight, he wrote back with enthusiasm, saying her Western scenes were unlike anything he had seen before and asking for more. He sold 3 of her paintings within a month at prices that made Eleanor gasp. "You could support us both with your painting if you wanted," Xavier joked when she showed him the bank draft that arrived in payment. "Maybe I should retire and just pose for you full time." "I rather like you working," Eleanor replied, running her hands over his bare chest as they lay together in bed one evening. "All this comes from physical labor, and I appreciate it immensely." Xavier laughed and pulled her closer for a thorough kiss that led to other activities and left them both breathless. As autumn deepened into winter, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, then all at once, when her monthly courses failed to arrive and morning sickness began to plague her. She told Xavier one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction even though she knew he wanted children eventually. Xavier's face lit up with such pure joy that Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are having a baby. Eleanor, that is wonderful. Are you happy about it?" "Yes," Eleanor said, and realized it was true. "I am. I was worried at first, worried about how it might affect my work, worried about whether I would be a good mother. But yes, I am happy. Terrified, but happy." "You will be an amazing mother," Xavier assured her, "and we will figure out how to make everything work, including your painting." "You do not have to give up anything, Eleanor. We will find a way." Xavier was true to his word. As Eleanor's pregnancy progressed and her body changed, he adjusted their life to accommodate her needs. He arranged for a local girl to come help with housework several days a week, freeing Eleanor to continue painting. He was endlessly patient with her mood swings and physical discomfort, bringing her strange foods when cravings struck and rubbing her aching back without complaint. Eleanor continued to paint through most of her pregnancy, though her subject matter shifted somewhat. She painted more domestic scenes now, finding beauty in the everyday moments of ranch life. Xavier mending harness by lamplight, his face intent on his work. Robert reading by the fire, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Nathan playing with one of the ranch dogs, his laughter captured in the tilt of his head and the openness of his expression. And she painted the landscape in winter, discovering that the stark beauty of the season moved her deeply. Snow transformed the prairie into something otherworldly, and the clear cold light made colors sharper and more defined. She bundled up against the cold and set up her easel in sheltered spots, her fingers stiff but her artistic vision keen. Their son was born in late April, during a spring rainstorm that drummed on the roof and made the world feel enclosed and intimate. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Eleanor thought she might die from the pain and exhaustion. But Martha was there, calm and experienced, guiding her through each contraction. And Xavier was there, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement, his face tight with worry but his presence steady. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and squalling, Eleanor felt a surge of emotion so powerful it swept away all the pain and fear. Xavier cut the cord with shaking hands, and then the baby was placed on Eleanor's chest, tiny and perfect and utterly dependent. "A boy," Martha announced unnecessarily. "A healthy boy with good lungs from the sound of him." "James," Xavier said, looking at Eleanor for confirmation. They had discussed names but not made final decisions. "James Robert, after your father and mine." "James Robert Ellsworth," Eleanor said, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect." The baby, as if approving of his name, stopped crying and blinked up at his parents with unfocused dark blue eyes. Xavier reached out one finger and James wrapped his tiny hand around it with surprising strength. "Hello, son," Xavier said softly. "Welcome to the world." The weeks following James's birth were exhausting in ways Eleanor had not anticipated. The baby needed constant care, feeding every few hours around the clock, and Eleanor was sore and recovering from the birth. Xavier helped as much as he could, walking with James when he fussed, changing soiled linens, bringing Eleanor food and water. Robert was surprisingly gentle with his grandson, sitting for long periods just watching the baby sleep with an expression of wonder on his weathered face. Eleanor did not paint for almost a month after James's birth. She was too tired, too consumed with the immediate demands of keeping a tiny human alive. But gradually, as James settled into more of a routine and her body healed, she felt the familiar itch to create returning. She started with sketches, quick drawings of James sleeping in his cradle or nursing, or making the funny faces that newborns make. Then she moved to more ambitious work, painting mother and child studies that captured the overwhelming love and exhaustion and wonder of new motherhood. Xavier commissioned one of these paintings from her as a gift to his father. It showed Eleanor sitting by the window in the golden light of late afternoon, James in her arms, both of them peaceful and content. When she gave it to Robert on his birthday, the older man's eyes grew suspiciously moist. "My wife would have loved this," he said gruffly. "She would have loved seeing our family grow, loved meeting you and James. Thank you, Eleanor, for this painting, but more for everything. For making Xavier happy, for giving us James, for bringing life back to this house." As James grew from infant to baby to toddler, Eleanor found ways to balance her roles as mother and artist. It was not always easy, and there were days when she felt like she was failing at both. But Xavier remained her steadfast supporter, believing in her talent and helping create space in their life for her to work. And she discovered that motherhood, far from limiting her art, had deepened it, giving her access to emotions and perspectives she had never explored before. She began to gain recognition for her Western paintings. Galleries in Philadelphia, Boston, and even New York requested her work. She sold steadily, building a reputation as one of the few artists genuinely capturing authentic frontier life. Art critics praised her technical skill and her emotional honesty, noting that her work lacked the romanticized quality of most Western art. When James was 2, Eleanor traveled east for the first time since her marriage, bringing a collection of new paintings for exhibition at a prestigious Boston gallery. Xavier came with her, curious to see the world Eleanor had left behind. They stayed with her mother and sisters, and Eleanor watched with amusement as her family tried to reconcile this confident, weathered rancher with their assumptions about frontier men. Xavier charmed them despite their initial reservations. He was articulate and educated, despite his lack of formal schooling, and his obvious devotion to Eleanor and James won over even her most skeptical sister. The gallery exhibition was a tremendous success, with several major collectors purchasing Eleanor's work and critics writing glowing reviews. But despite the acclaim and the renewed connection with her family, Eleanor found herself homesick for Iowa, for the vast prairie skies and the ranch and the life she had built there. Xavier felt it too. She could see his relief when they finally boarded the train heading west. "You truly do not miss it?" he asked as they watched the eastern cities give way to open farmland. "The culture, the galleries, the society." "I have everything I need at home," Eleanor replied. "You, James, the ranch, space and light and freedom to paint what matters to me. Why would I miss anything else?" Over the next several years, their life settled into a comfortable rhythm punctuated by the normal challenges of ranching and raising a family. James was joined by a daughter, Emma, when he was 4, and then another son, Robert, 2 years after that. The house that had been so quiet and masculine when Eleanor first arrived grew noisy and chaotic with children's laughter and activity. Eleanor continued to paint, though she had to be more strategic about her time. She worked early in the mornings before the children woke, or in the evenings after they went to bed, or during their nap times. Xavier built her a separate studio in one of the outbuildings, giving her a space dedicated solely to her work, where she could leave projects in progress without worrying about small hands getting into her paints. Her reputation continued to grow. She had exhibitions in major cities, and her paintings commanded impressive prices. She became known as one of the foremost chroniclers of Western life, and other artists began to imitate her style. But Eleanor remained focused on the work itself rather than the fame, continuing to paint the subjects that moved her, the landscapes she loved, the people she knew, the authentic reality of frontier life. The ranch prospered under the combined management of Robert, Xavier, and Nathan. They expanded their herd and improved their breeding stock, and the Ellsworth reputation for quality horses spread throughout the region. Nathan eventually married a schoolteacher from Omaha, a practical woman named Irene who adapted to ranch life with surprising ease. They built a house on the western edge of the ranch property, close enough for daily cooperation but far enough for independence. Robert grew older more slowly than seemed possible, remaining active and engaged well into his 60s. He was a devoted grandfather, teaching James and Emma and Robert to ride almost as soon as they could walk, passing on his knowledge and love of the land. Eleanor marked the changes in her family through her art. She painted Xavier at 30, then 35, then 40, documenting the subtle ways time marked him, the lines deepening around his eyes, silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, his body remaining strong but carrying the accumulated wear of hard work. She painted their children growing, capturing different stages of childhood and the unique personality of each child. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier gave Eleanor a gift that left her speechless. A room in town, a proper studio space in Council Bluffs where she could work when she needed to be away from the distractions of the ranch. It was in a building on Main Street with enormous windows facing north, perfect light and enough space for her to spread out multiple projects. "You have given up so much to be here," Xavier said when he showed her the space. "Your life back east, the constant access to culture and art, proximity to other artists and galleries. I wanted to give you something back, a place that is entirely yours where you can focus on your work without worrying about dinner or children or ranch concerns." Eleanor threw her arms around him, blinking back tears. "You did not have to do this. I have never regretted my choice to stay, not for a single moment." "I know," Xavier said, holding her close, "but I wanted to anyway. You have made my life infinitely richer, Eleanor. You taught me to see beauty and meaning in things I took for granted. You gave me our children. You chose this life when you could have had an easier path. The least I can do is support your work in every way possible." The studio became Eleanor's sanctuary. Several days a week, she would drive into town and spend hours painting uninterrupted. She could work on larger canvases there, more ambitious projects that required sustained focus. And the change of scene was refreshing, giving her new perspectives when she returned to the ranch. When James was 15, he announced his intention to attend college back east. He wanted to study engineering, fascinated by the railroads and bridges and machines that were transforming the country. Eleanor and Xavier supported his ambition, though it meant their oldest child would be far away for years. Emma, at 11, declared she wanted to be a doctor, an ambition so unusual for a girl that even Eleanor was initially taken aback. But after the shock wore off, they encouraged her too, finding books and arranging for her to spend time with the town doctor to see if her interest was genuine. Young Robert, at 9, was the one most clearly following in Xavier's footsteps. He lived for the ranch, spending every possible moment with the horses and cattle, pestering his father and grandfather with endless questions about breeding and training and land management. "At least one of them will stay," Xavier said with wry amusement as they watched Robert practicing roping under Nathan's instruction. "Though honestly, I want all of them to find their own paths, whatever makes them happy." "Like we did," Eleanor said, leaning against his shoulder as they stood on the porch in the evening light. 20 years of marriage had not diminished her attraction to him or the sense of rightness she felt when they were together. If anything, it had deepened, becoming something richer and more complex than the passionate early days. "Like we did," Xavier agreed. "Though I think we were lucky finding each other the way we did. Not everyone gets that." "I used to think art was enough," Eleanor mused. that my work would fill my whole life and I would not need anything else. But loving you, having our family, building this life together, it has made my art better, not worse. I paint with more depth now, more understanding of what truly matters. You paint masterpieces, Xavier said, turning to pull her into his arms. But you are my masterpiece, Eleanor. You are the most beautiful thing in my life every single day. You are the masterpiece I have been seeking, Eleanor replied, echoing the words she had spoken to him so long ago. And I found you, against all odds, in the middle of the prairie. They kissed as the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold that Eleanor would try to capture later, but knew she could never quite get right. Some moments were too perfect, too full of meaning to be translated onto canvas. They could only be lived and remembered and treasured. The years continued to flow, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children and the steady satisfaction of work well done. James went east to school and thrived there, eventually working for a railroad company and sending letters full of enthusiasm about his projects. Emma persisted in her ambition to study medicine, and after much discussion and planning, she too went east at 17 to attend one of the few medical schools that accepted women. Robert stayed on the ranch, officially taking over many of Xavier's responsibilities as Xavier moved into more of a management role. Eleanor painted through it all, her work evolving and maturing. She began teaching occasionally, taking on students who showed genuine talent and dedication. Several young artists came west specifically to study with her, drawn by her reputation and the authenticity of her work. She found teaching rewarding, a way to pass on what she had learned and to help others find their own artistic voices. When Eleanor turned 50, Xavier organized a surprise exhibition of her work at the state capitol. He had secretly contacted galleries and collectors, gathering pieces she had created over her entire career. The exhibition traced her artistic development from the technically skilled, but somewhat conventional early work to the powerful, emotionally resonant pieces of her mature style. Critics came from as far as Chicago and San Francisco, and the exhibition received national attention. Eleanor walked through the gallery on opening night, Xavier's hand firm in hers, and felt overwhelmed by seeing so much of her life's work displayed together. There were paintings from her first months in Iowa, capturing her initial wonder at the landscape and people. There were portraits of Xavier and their children at various ages. There were Western scenes showing cattle drives and horse breaking and weather and prairie light. And there were more recent pieces, complex and layered works that dealt with themes of home and belonging and the relationship between humans and land. "This is extraordinary," a well-dressed critic from New York said, introducing herself to Eleanor during the reception. "Your early work shows tremendous technical skill, but these recent pieces, they have something more. They have soul, Mrs. Ellsworth. They speak to fundamental human experiences in ways that transcend their specific subject matter. You have not just documented the West. You have captured something essential about what it means to build a life and a home." After the woman moved on, Eleanor turned to Xavier with tears in her eyes. "None of this would exist without you. You know that, do not you? You are in every painting, even the ones where you do not appear. This entire body of work exists because you loved me and supported me and believed in what I was trying to do. We did this together," Xavier said firmly. "Your talent is your own, Eleanor. I just made sure you had the space and support to develop it. But the work, the vision, the dedication, that was all you." Robert Ellsworth Sr. passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 73, surrounded by his family. His death marked the end of an era for the ranch. Xavier officially took over as head of the family operation, with Robert Jr. working alongside him. Nathan continued to manage his section of the expanded ranch with Irene. Eleanor painted Robert's portrait from memory, capturing him as he had been in his prime. Strong, weathered, looking out over his land with satisfaction and pride. She gave it to Xavier, and he hung it in the main room of the house where his father's presence would continue to watch over the ranch he had built. As Eleanor and Xavier moved into their later years, they found their relationship deepening in ways they had not expected. The passion of youth had evolved into something quieter but no less powerful. They knew each other completely now, all strengths and flaws and quirks, and loved each other not despite, but because of that complete knowledge. Eleanor continued to paint, though her hands were not as steady as they once had been. She worked on a series of paintings about memory and time, abstract pieces that were different from anything she had done before. Critics were divided about this new direction, but Eleanor did not particularly care. She was painting for herself now, exploring ideas that fascinated her without worrying about commercial success. Xavier remained active on the ranch until his early 60s, when old injuries and the accumulated wear of hard physical work forced him to slow down. He handed over most of the physical work to Robert and the ranch hands, but he remained involved in management and planning. And he spent more time with Eleanor, the two of them sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for more than 4 decades. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. James came from Chicago with his wife and 3 children. Emma came from Boston, where she had established a successful medical practice with her husband and 2 daughters. And Robert was there with his wife and 4 children, the next generation of Ellsworths who would carry on the ranch tradition. Eleanor looked around at the crowded house, full of noise and laughter and love, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought about the young woman she had been, traveling west alone with nothing but her art supplies and her determination. She had been looking for inspiration, for subjects worthy of her talent, and she had found so much more. Xavier appeared at her elbow, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, but his pale eyes were still sharp and clear, still looking at her with that same intensity that had captured her heart 50 years ago. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, handing her a glass. "Everything," Eleanor said. "How I came here looking for art and found a life. How I thought I knew what I wanted and discovered I wanted something completely different. How lucky I have been." "We have been lucky together," Xavier corrected. "Eleanor, when I saw you that first day in town, sketching on Main Street, something in me recognized you. I did not know it then, but I was seeing my future. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend for 50 years. You have challenged me and supported me and made my life infinitely richer. I would not change a single day of it. Not even the day I accidentally let all the chickens out and it took us 3 hours to catch them." Eleanor teased. Xavier laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "Not even that day, though I admit I was less amused at the time." They touched their glasses together and drank, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built together. Eleanor lived to be 83 years old, painting almost until the end. Her final work was a simple landscape, the view from the ranch house porch at sunset, the light golden and warm across the prairie grass. She finished it on a Tuesday afternoon in late summer, cleaned her brushes carefully, and told Xavier she was tired and wanted to rest. She died peacefully in her sleep that night, Xavier's hand in hers. The grief that swept through their family was profound, but it was tempered by gratitude for a life fully lived and work that would endure. Xavier followed her 3 years later at age 86. He remained active on the ranch almost until the end, still riding and working with horses, though at a much gentler pace. When he died, it was quickly, a heart attack that took him while he was doing what he loved. Robert found him in the barn, sitting on a hay bale near one of the horse stalls, looking peaceful. They buried Xavier next to Eleanor in the small cemetery on the edge of town, under cottonwood trees that whispered in the constant prairie wind. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives they had touched over their long years in Iowa. At the reception afterward, held at the ranch house that was now Robert's, their grandchildren looked through Eleanor's paintings that lined every wall. There were hundreds of pieces, a visual record of a life and a family and a place. And in so many of them, Xavier appeared, young and strong, middle-aged and weathered, old and silver-haired but still vital. Eleanor had spent 50 years painting the man she loved, trying to capture in paint what he meant to her. The youngest grandchild, a girl of 12 named Eleanor after her grandmother, stood looking at one particular painting for a long time. It showed Xavier at perhaps 30, standing in one of the corrals with a young horse. The late afternoon light painted everything gold, and Xavier's expression as he looked at the horse was patient and kind and utterly focused. Did grandmother really say grandfather was a masterpiece? She asked her father, Robert. She did, Robert confirmed. The first time she saw him, she said he was the masterpiece she had been seeking. And she spent the rest of her life proving it, painting him over and over, always finding new ways to show how extraordinary she thought he was. "That is the most romantic thing I have ever heard," young Eleanor said. "I want to love like that someday." They were special, Robert agreed. They found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together, not just the family and the ranch, but the way they loved each other. That was their real masterpiece. Years later, when Eleanor Harper Ellsworth's work was collected for a major retrospective at a prestigious museum, art historians noted the prominence of Xavier in her paintings. Some criticized this focus, suggesting she had limited herself by returning so often to the same subject. But others understood that Eleanor had been engaged in a lifelong study of love and devotion, using Xavier as her model, but really exploring universal themes of connection and commitment. The retrospective attracted record crowds and solidified Eleanor's place in the canon of important American artists. Her Western paintings were recognized not just as skillful documentation, but as profound meditations on place and belonging. And her portraits of Xavier were acknowledged as some of the most moving depictions of love in American art. The ranch remained in the Ellsworth family, passed down through generations. Robert's children and grandchildren continued to work the land, adapting to changing times but maintaining the core values Robert and Xavier and their father before them had established. Eleanor's paintings hung throughout the house, a constant reminder of the woman who had come west looking for inspiration and had instead found home. And in art schools and galleries across the country, students studied Eleanor Harper Ellsworth's work, analyzing her technique and composition and use of light. But the more perceptive among them saw something deeper in her paintings, particularly the many portraits of Xavier. They saw an artist who had found her perfect subject, not because he was conventionally beautiful or exotic or dramatic, but because she loved him completely. And that love, that absolute commitment and devotion, shone through every brushstroke, transforming simple ranch scenes and portraits into something transcendent. Eleanor had come west to capture truth, to paint authentic life rather than romantic fantasy. And she had succeeded beyond anything she could have imagined. But the greatest truth she captured was the simplest and most profound. That love, real love between two people who truly see and value each other, is the ultimate masterpiece. Everything else, all the paintings and acclaim and artistic legacy, was just a reflection of that central reality. Xavier had been her masterpiece. But together, they had created something even more beautiful, a life of purpose and meaning built on mutual respect and support and deep, abiding love. That was their real work of art, more lasting than any canvas, more valuable than any critical praise. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had nurtured, in the community they had served. It lived on in every person who looked at Eleanor's paintings and felt something shift inside them, some recognition of what it means to love and be loved completely. The masterpiece Eleanor had been seeking was not just Xavier, though he was certainly that. It was the life they built together, the family they raised, the love that endured through 50 years and continued even after death. That was art in its highest form, not something hung on a wall, but something lived fully, deeply, honestly. That was the truth Eleanor had traveled west to find, though she had not known it when she set out. And in finding it, in living it with Xavier beside her every step of the way, she had created her greatest work.